Hey there, it's Greg. Today, I want to take a look and walk you through some of the releases for Microsoft Hates Greg's Quick Measures, or Mushkookum for short, and show you a little bit around behind the scenes of the code, and then what I'm thinking of for upcoming releases in that. So I actually have here on the GitHub, GDeclar, Microsoft Hates Greg's Quick Measures. I have an actual releases file out there. If you click on that file, then it gives you a little bit of information on current and future releases. So as you can see out here, I have the alpha version, which was the original version of Mushkookum, and now the latest version, which is currently the beta version. So if you take a look at the releases file, you'll see that the original alpha was released on October 6th, 2021. And had around 30 or so formulas that was part of it. In the beta I had planned was I wanted to do a lot of code, cleanup and refactoring, and then add some additional formulas, about 30 or so. My original release date was December 2021. So I'm a 27, 28-year consultant, so I like to under-promise and over-deliver. So I ended up with a free weekend and did the beta release. I got it in shape. I was able to release it early on October 25th of 2021. And it included a couple minor bug fixes in the lookup min-max. It wasn't switching between columns and measures. Fixed that. Fixed a minor DAX code error in the week ending and starting. Then I added 45 new formulas, and you can see them all here for weekday and week num and find or search and distance, and it's got a pretty long list here of different DAX measures. But probably what's more interesting, and I'll get into some more details on this as we look through the code, but the Gamma release, I'm targeting a February 2022 release. Now, that may be a little early. I've got some vacation time coming up, got some holidays. So anytime I have a free weekend where I'm not writing a book or doing something like that, I'll probably be working on this code. So the original Mushkookum interface was based sort of on the concept of the way that quick measures are done in Power BI Desktop, right? So you have to select a particular column in a particular table, and then you right-click it and say New Quick Measure. So I kind of designed the original concept for this around the same line. So you can see here I have a very simple data model with just one table, really. And you have to select, something like the item column, and then select a quick measure that you want to create, like find or search. And then you get your configuration screen, and you can have things like search for one, something like that, and generate the DAX. And so there you go. Or if you don't want it to be, if you want it to be case insensitive, you generate the DAX and it's search instead of find. I can never remember that one. That's why I put it in there as a quick measure. So what I want to do in the Gamma version is there's quite a few of these quick measures that are in here where it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of what you initially select as a column. In fact, in a lot of cases, not a lot of cases, but in some cases, selecting what column in what table you select has no bearing at all upon what gets generated in the DAX, because I'm actually deciding that as part of the quick measure configuration itself. Let me see if I can find one. It's probably an other. No, why can't I find it when I want to find it? This may be something like lookup min max or something like that. Yeah, so really I'm saying a lookup column. I think that one actually does, but there are some of these where I'm actually configuring it. It's all about what's in the configuration screen. And this has no bearing upon anything. So what I want to do is I actually want to kind of flip the script on this a little bit and make everything work the same way in terms of everything set in the configuration screen of the DAX configuration. I'm just going to completely get rid of this panel right here So that what you'll do is you'll start out and you'll just select the quick measure you want, and then you'll configure everything in the configuration screen. That's the thinking behind getting rid of that initial column selection pane. I think it's going to be a little easier, more intuitive. It'll be, since I'll be able to, specify this is your lookup column, this is the column that for this is the column for that. If I set this to value, OK, generate DAX. Yeah, so really, that item doesn't even show up in. Oh, there's item. Never mind, it does. But anyway, there's some that don't. We'll just go with that for right now. But what I'll do is I'll have a lookup column, and then I'll have a value column, let's say, or something like that and so you'll be setting both your columns over here in the configuration screen versus first selecting this and then doing lookup max simple or something like that. It'll all be here, so I think it'll be a lot more intuitive that way, in terms of what you're looking up, what you're trying to return, and that sort of thing. So I'll probably have a lookup column, then like a return column, for example. And you'll just set it all here. So consolidate to a single dynamic measure configuration pane. So the initial version of this, every quick measure had its own configuration screen. What I mean by that, and let's jump into the code a little bit here. This is the main window XAML. So as you can see, I have, this is the column selection pane, this is the measure selection pane, and then this pane right here is actually, you can see it's the quick measure configurator. Then it's also, I have the column selector panel. That was added in the beta. So really they're just stacked on top of each other. So when you go in to select something like this, all it's doing is hiding the configuration pane and then allows you to pick a column. When you click OK, it then hides that pane, and this pane comes up. Well, each one of these measures in the original version had its own configuration screen that was unique to that measure. And I realize that's fairly not optimal, let's put it that way. Not very efficient. So this configuration, this quick measure configuration configurator XAML, if I click on that, it's just this panel, right? But if you actually look through the code, you can see here's my distance unit converter UI, and my volume unit converter UI, my density converter unit converter UI, and just goes on and on and on, right? So each one of these is actually stacked right on one on top of the other. So when you're selecting a measure, it's just hiding all the other ones and then displaying the correct configurator screen for you. And then all these configurator screens you can see are right here. So if I take a look at this one, so there's the area unit converter, the aggregation sum, square from and to, and all of that. And there's the ATAN2 configuration screen, and on, right? So they're all a little different. Well, I started thinking about how the eventual goal in all of this was going to be to get to a point where you can add your own quick measures yourself and build up a library of your own quick measures that you create yourself. And I think the next step to doing that, and I got into this with a lot with the beta. So the beta actually reuses the same configuration screens a lot of times, and it's just hiding or collapsing different things that aren't needed, right? So if I take a look at the code behind here, so for example, okay, here's a good example, right? All of the binomial distribution, negative binomial distribution, they're all using the negative binom UI, which is this guy right here, right? So what they're doing, and then they're setting their own labels for things and default values, and they're collapsing different aspects of the screen. So we're setting things to either visible or collapsed or not visible. And you can see that, there's a lot of that goes on in here in various different places. Here's a lot of the initial ones, right? They're a lot more simple because I'm not hiding or collapsing or doing anything fancy. So as I got into this, it made sense to me that, well, if I come up with a configurator screen that has all the different types of elements that I want on it, that I could then control those elements So here, for example, this is using the ATAN2 UI, but it's collapsing the aggregations, right? So those don't show when I'm doing the covariance calculation, even though it's using the same UI as the ATAN2. So it came up with the idea that, well, maybe the first step towards this is if I can come up with a single configuration screen that has all the different elements on it that I want. Then what I can do is for each of the different measures that I have, I can just hide and collapse the things I don't want and just display the things that are required for setting that measure. And that'll get me a step closer to the eventual goal where that configurator screen will be completely dynamic. My understanding, and I haven't done this yet because I'm fairly new to WPF applications, my understanding is that I will be able to, instead of defining all of the different elements within each of the UIs, that I will be able to, insert a text box where I want to in the XAML from the C# code, that's the code behind, if you will. So in theory, right, you'll have a JSON file, and that JSON file will define certain parameters in the initial DAX code for the quick measure. And then the code behind will take a look and say, oh, this parameter, the user wants this to be an aggregation that only shows min max, or it's an aggregation that shows the X aggregators, or it's a text field with when they want the default value to be 0.2 in this case, and the label to be %. So what I'll be able to do eventually, and this will be in the Delta version, is that the code behind will actually dynamically create those elements on the configurator screen as required by the definition of the measure in the JSON file. That's what this means. So the first step in that is I want to get down to a single configuration pane where I'm going to have all my elements that are on all the different measures that show up. I'll have them all defined, and I'll just be able to hide and collapse them as necessary and dynamically change their labels and things like that to be what they need to be to make it intuitive to the end user. Now, another thing that I want to do in the Gamma version, so right now, whenever you select something over here, regardless of whether you want it to be or not, it'll always use whatever table is selected over here. I can show you this in the JSON, but there's parameters that are defined as __ capital TABLE __, and it goes through and replaces all of those with the table name that's been selected. So now in more complex quick measures, that's not going to be sufficient because you're going to want to have certain columns come from certain tables and certain other columns come from certain different tables. Now you can always go through and modify the DAX code. That's why I made this an editable screen or an editable text box, but it's still not optimal, right? So what I'm going to be doing is the current code preserves the table name or the column name, if you will, and it does the table name, but it does those separately. And what I want to be able to do is then really what I need to be able to do is say, I have this value, this column value that I'm generating my DAX on, but I also am going to need to preserve the table name so that I can use both and just replace one element. Right now, this is two separate. Replacing this table is one. It's coming from the table value that I preserved, and then this is a column value that I'm replacing that's been selected over here. I think what I'm going to need to do is have those both. When I replace the value, it's going to need to be the table name and also the value, whatever column's been selected. In that way, when I go through and replace the different replaceable text, I'll be able to preserve the table name and the column name, and that'll lead to the ability to support more complex measures versus wherever there's a table that's being referenced. I'm always assuming right now that it's whatever table's been selected over here and not what's been selected over here. So like if I select quarter over here and click OK and say generate DAX, right? That's not going to work because technically that quarter isn't even in this table, even though this assumes it is. So that is another thing that I'm going to try to fix in the Gamma version. That's going to require some refactoring of the DAX code behind, or the JSON definitions of it. And then I also want to, I don't know, I'm not going to make any promises on this, but once I do this, it should really make adding new quick measures really a lot faster, and I'll be able to handle a lot more complicated DAX measures. I found in my initial goal here for the beta was 30, but as I refactored the code and got better at reusing the UI interfaces, really became really fast to be able to add in these quick measures. I could do it really, really quickly because there was only about 2 or 3 places in the code that I had to touch, and I could copy pasta, a lot of it, right? So now there is a JSON file that sits out there, and in theory, you could use it to create your own quick measures, but you'd really have to know what's going on behind the code to really understand how to do that effectively. So if you go into, where did it go? It's not resources, the data. No. I love it when I can't find my own stuff. Oh, supported measures. I did have it. It was under resources. Supported measures.json. If we actually open that file up, that actually exists when you install Mushkookum. It exists in a directory under resources and wherever you installed it. And technically, in theory, you could go in there and add your own if you knew what was going on with the code behind. You'd probably have to add them into a different group so that you could put them in a group of my personal group, for example, and then you could actually have the display names, but the display names would have to replicate current measures that are defined because I key off of the measure name in order to know what configuration screen to display and then how to configure that configuration screen. So again, that is a bigger chore for another day, which we will tackle once we get to the Delta. Then it'll be a lot easier to use the DAX JSON template. And I'm thinking about using the same one from Power BI Tips that they developed, although I don't know if it's going to be sufficient for the requirements that I'm going to need, because some of these quick measures, in order to make them easy to use and intuitive to use, I really want to define, hey, this is a drop down, and I only want max and min to show up as values, or I want these other aggregations to show up, or I maybe completely other things that have no relation to aggregations. I want these values to show up, and I want that to be definable by the end user in an easy, intuitive way. So I haven't taken I've taken a look at the JSON support, the DAX that they use for DAX generator from Power BI Tips. I'm not sure it's going to be sufficient, but it'd be nice if I could reuse that because then the tools would technically be kind of compatible with one another. And again, I'm going to have to refactor all the DAX formulas and all of the code behind to support this whole dynamic concept of parameters in that. And then, hopefully add some more additional formulas. So I hope this has been a kind of a behind the scenes look at the what's being planned for the releases, kind of how the code works currently. And if you have any questions, just email me. And I'm trying this out as a where I'm not showing my face, I guess you could say, where I don't have my video on. If you don't like it, let me know in the comments, and maybe the future videos we'll put out will be more, I'll have the video turned on for you guys. And I really want this channel to be more than just only about the tool itself, but what I'll be doing in future videos is I'll be going in, I'm probably going to start with this lookup min-max to explain the different variations. Why is there a lookup max and a lookup max simple? And what are some alternative ways of doing this using calculate function, for example, that actually only relatively became possible in some cases. So the future videos on this are really going to dig in and try to look at all these DAX codes and explain, here's the thought process behind it, and here's what's going to happen in the future with it. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys later.